A Chinese company that most people over 30 have never heard of is now selling more clothing than Amazon Fashion, H&M, and Zara combined. And it's doing it with an algorithm so powerful that it can take a dress from concept to customer doorstep in 7 days. Not 7 weeks, not 7 months. 7 days. So why isn't anyone talking about what this actually means? Here's what the mainstream fashion press gets wrong about SHEIN. They call it fast fashion on steroids. They frame it as just another cheap clothing retailer exploiting low prices, but that completely misses the point. SHEIN isn't a fashion company that uses technology. It's a technology company that happens to sell clothes. And that distinction is the reason it generated an estimated $32.2 billion in revenue in 2023, more than H&M and Zara's parent company Inditex earned in their online channels combined. Most people think SHEIN grew because it sells cheap clothes to teenagers on TikTok. But here's what's really happening. SHEIN built one of the most sophisticated demand prediction and micro-manufacturing systems on the planet. And I'm going to break down the 3 invisible engines that power this machine. 3 systems that most Western competitors don't even understand, let alone know how to replicate. The first engine is what I call the test and read algorithm. The second is the Thousand-Supplier Web. And the third is the invisible logistics loop. Each one on its own would give any company a competitive edge. Together, they create something that the fashion industry has never seen before. And honestly, something that should make every Western retailer deeply nervous. Let me start with engine number 1, the test and read algorithm, because this is where the real genius lives. When I was researching SHEIN's back-end operations, a supply chain consultant based in Guangzhou told me something I couldn't stop thinking about. He said, "SHEIN doesn't guess what people want to buy. It already knows before the customer knows." That sounds like marketing hype until you see the numbers. Here's what nobody tells you. SHEIN adds between 2,000 and 10,000 new styles to its platform every single day. Let me say that again. Every single day. By comparison, Zara, which revolutionized fast fashion, introduces roughly 500 new items per week. SHEIN does that before lunch on a Monday. But volume isn't the secret. The secret is what happens before those items ever get manufactured at scale. SHEIN produces initial runs of as few as 100 to 200 units per style. That's it, a tiny batch. Then the algorithm watches. It tracks click-through rates, add to cart behavior, wishlist saves, scroll pause duration, and dozens of other microsignals in real time. If a dress gets a click-through rate above a certain threshold within the first 48 hours, the system automatically triggers a reorder, sometimes scaling production to 10,000 units within a week. If it doesn't perform, it dies. No markdowns, no warehouse full of unsold inventory, no end-of-season fire sale, just data, a decision, and a pivot. This is 2,800% more efficient than the traditional fashion model, where brands design collections 6 months in advance, manufacture enormous quantities based on trend forecasts, and then pray that consumers actually want what they made. The industry average for unsold inventory is somewhere between 25 and 40%. SHEIN's waste rate? By most analyst estimates, it's under 10%. Let me show you what this actually means in practice. A traditional retailer sees a trending color on a Paris runway. 6 months later, it hits stores. SHEIN's algorithm spots the same trend. Not from a runway, but from social media engagement data, Google Trends spikes, and competitor product page traffic. Within 3 days, a prototype exists. Within 7, it's on the app. Within 14, if it's a winner, 50,000 units have shipped. Here's what matters. This isn't just speed. It's a completely different relationship with risk. Traditional fashion is a gambling industry pretending to be a creative one. SHEIN turned it into a data business, and that changes everything about how money flows, how inventory works, and ultimately, who wins. But the algorithm alone doesn't explain SHEIN's dominance. It needs a manufacturing network unlike anything the West has ever built. And that's the second engine. The one that makes most analysts completely miss what's actually happening behind the scenes. Let me show you. So here's the second engine at work, and this one operates in the physical world, in the factories, workshops, and back alleys of Guangzhou, China. It's called the Thousand-Supplier Web, and it's the infrastructure that makes the algorithm's speed actually possible. Because what good is knowing what customers want in real time if you can't manufacture it in real time? Here's a question most people never ask. How does SHEIN produce thousands of new styles every single day without owning a single factory? Think about that for a moment. Nike owns factories. Zara's parent company, Inditex, owns massive production facilities in Spain and Portugal. H&M contracts with large-scale manufacturers across Southeast Asia. SHEIN? It owns none of that. 0 factories. And yet it outproduces all of them. When I spoke with a textile sourcing specialist who works with suppliers in the Panyu district of Guangzhou, he described SHEIN's network as the most decentralized manufacturing system in fashion history. SHEIN works with an estimated 5,400 third-party suppliers, most of them small workshops employing between 20 and 200 workers. These aren't massive industrial operations. They're nimble, hyper-specialized micro-factories clustered within a few hundred kilometers of each other. Let me show you the numbers that matter. A traditional fashion brand sends a purchase order to a factory with a minimum order quantity of 1,000 to 5,000 units. Lead time, 60 to 90 days. SHEIN sends digital orders, sometimes automatically generated by the algorithm, with minimums as low as 100 pieces. Lead time, 3 to 7 days. That's not an incremental improvement. That's a completely different manufacturing paradigm. And here's what makes the web so powerful. Each supplier is connected to SHEIN through a proprietary software system that manages everything: fabric sourcing, pattern files, production scheduling, quality benchmarks, and delivery deadlines. When a supplier receives an order, they can see exactly what fabric to use, what measurements to follow, and when the finished product needs to ship. It's almost like a franchise model, except instead of selling burgers, they're producing micro batches of trend-driven clothing at impossible speed. If you want to understand why Western brands can't replicate this, just look at geography. SHEIN's supplier cluster sits within the Pearl River Delta, the most concentrated textile manufacturing region on Earth. Raw materials, dye houses, zipper suppliers, button manufacturers, packaging companies, everything is within a 2-hour drive. A workshop can receive fabric in the morning and ship finished garments by evening. Try doing that when your design team is in Stockholm, your fabric comes from Turkey, and your factory is in Bangladesh. Stay with me, because what comes next changes how you think about this entire model. The Thousand-Supplier Web isn't just about speed, it's about competition. SHEIN's system creates intense rivalry among its suppliers. Each workshop gets rated on quality scores, defect rates, delivery speed, and cost efficiency. The highest-rated suppliers get more orders. The lowest-rated ones get fewer or get dropped entirely. It's a Darwinian ecosystem that continuously optimizes itself. A factory owner I connected with through a mutual contact in Shenzhen described it bluntly. He said, "You either get faster and cheaper or you disappear. There is no middle ground." That pressure is what drives SHEIN's costs so remarkably low. The average price point for a SHEIN garment is between $4 and $18. A comparable item at H&M might be $20 to $35. At Zara, 30 to 60. The math is devastating for competitors. But here's the part that should surprise you. This isn't just about exploiting cheap labor, though labor concerns are real and documented. It's about eliminating every layer of inefficiency that traditional fashion brands have tolerated for decades. No middlemen, no agents, no showroom samples flying business class to buying offices in Manhattan. Just data flowing from the app to the algorithm to the factory floor. This is 5,400 suppliers operating as a single organism, coordinated by software, driven by demand signals, and accountable to performance metrics updated in real time. It's a manufacturing philosophy that most Western companies can't adopt, not because they don't want to, but because their entire supply chain architecture was built for a different era. And yet, even with the algorithm and the supplier web working in perfect sync, SHEIN still needed to solve one massive problem. The problem that has destroyed countless cross-border e-commerce companies. Getting those packages from Guangzhou to your doorstep cheaply and quickly, without bleeding money on logistics. That third engine is the most underestimated piece of the puzzle, and honestly, it's the one that reveals something uncomfortable about how global trade actually works. The third engine, the invisible logistics loop, is where SHEIN's model goes from impressive to genuinely difficult to compete with. And it starts with a question that almost nobody in the mainstream media is asking. How does a company ship a $4 dress from China to a customer in Ohio and still make a profit? Think about that. The dress costs $4. Shipping a small parcel internationally costs anywhere from $5 to $15 through standard carriers. The math doesn't work. Unless you've built a logistics system specifically engineered to exploit the hidden architecture of global trade. Here's what nobody tells you about SHEIN's shipping model. For years, SHEIN leveraged a provision in international postal agreements, specifically the Universal Postal Union's terminal dues system, that allowed small parcels from developing nations to enter Western postal networks at dramatically subsidized rates. A package from Guangzhou to Chicago could cost SHEIN as little as $1 to $2 in postage. The same package sent from a warehouse in New Jersey might cost $4 to $6 domestically. This is the de minimis paradox. In the United States, any import valued under $800 enters duty-free. No tariffs, no customs processing fees, no import taxes. SHEIN ships millions of individual low-value packages directly to consumers, and each one slides under that threshold. In 2023 alone, an estimated 1.36 billion de minimis packages entered the U.S., and analysts believe SHEIN and its Chinese competitor Temu accounted for roughly 30% of that volume. That's approximately 408 million packages bypassing the tariff system entirely. Let me show you what this actually means for competition. An American clothing brand importing a container of garments pays duties averaging 16.5%. They pay warehouse costs, distribution center fees, and domestic shipping. SHEIN pays essentially none of that. A senior trade policy analyst I spoke with in Washington described it as the largest unintentional subsidy in the history of global retail. The system was designed in the 1960s for occasional personal mail. Nobody imagined a single company would weaponize it to ship hundreds of millions of commercial parcels per year. Here's the uncomfortable truth. SHEIN didn't break any laws. It simply read the rules more carefully than anyone else and built its entire logistics model around the gaps. While Western retailers were optimizing warehouse layouts and negotiating UPS contracts, SHEIN was engineering a direct-to-consumer pipeline that treated international postal infrastructure as a competitive weapon. But SHEIN's logistics story is evolving. As regulatory scrutiny intensifies, and it is intensifying, the company has started building warehouses in the US, Europe, and the Middle East. It opened a massive distribution center in Indiana in 2023. It's establishing fulfillment nodes in Poland and the UAE. This is SHEIN transitioning from pure cross-border shipping to a hybrid model, hedging against the inevitable tightening of de minimis loopholes. If you're finding this valuable, hit that like button, because the numbers I'm about to share put this whole system into perspective. SHEIN's estimated gross margins sit between 60 and 70%. That's not a typo. 60 to 70%. For comparison, H&M operates at roughly 52% gross margin. Zara's parent Inditex hits about 57%. Nike averages around 44%. SHEIN's algorithmic waste reduction, micro-batch manufacturing, and logistics arbitrage combine to create margins that most fashion executives would consider physically impossible. And this connects to something even bigger. Because SHEIN isn't just a fashion story, it's a blueprint. It's proof of concept that a Chinese technology company can take a fragmented, inefficient Western industry, rebuild it from the data layer up, and dominate it within a decade. The company was founded in 2012. By 2022, it was valued at $100 billion, making it the third most valuable private company on Earth at the time, behind only SpaceX and ByteDance. Here's what matters. The three engines, the test and read algorithm, the Thousand-Supplier Web, and the invisible logistics loop, don't just work independently. They form a flywheel. More data improves the algorithm. A better algorithm reduces waste. Less waste means lower costs. Lower costs mean lower prices. Lower prices attract more customers. More customers generate more data. And the wheel spins faster and faster. So the real question isn't whether SHEIN is impressive. It clearly is. The real question is whether anything can stop it. And the answer to that is far more complicated than most people realize. Let me pull this together, because the full picture is more nuanced and more consequential than any single headline can capture. We've broken down the three engines that power SHEIN's dominance. The test and read algorithm that eliminates guesswork. The Thousand-Supplier Web that turns thousands of microfactories into a single responsive organism. and the invisible logistics loop that exploits the hidden subsidies buried in global trade infrastructure. Together, I call this the demand-first manufacturing model, and it represents something that goes far beyond cheap dresses and viral TikTok hauls. It's a fundamental reimagining of how products get made, moved, and sold. And whether you love SHEIN or hate it, understanding this model is critical because it's already spreading to electronics, home goods, beauty products, and beyond. But can anything actually stop it? When I was speaking with a retail strategist in London last year, she told me something that stuck with me. She said, SHEIN doesn't have competitors. It has imitators who are always 18 months behind. And that's largely true today. But there are 3 scenarios unfolding right now that could reshape this entire landscape. Scenario 1, regulatory closure. Governments wake up. The de minimis loophole gets tightened or eliminated. The U.S. Congress has already introduced the Informed Consumers Act and the Import Security and Fairness Act, both targeting low-value shipments from Chinese e-commerce platforms. The European Union is drafting similar provisions under its customs reform package. If the $800 threshold drops to, say, $10, which is where the EU is heading, SHEIN's logistics cost advantage evaporates overnight. Suddenly, every package gets taxed, every shipment gets inspected. The invisible logistics loop breaks. SHEIN has anticipated this, which is why it's building Western warehouses, but shifting to domestic fulfillment destroys a significant portion of its margin advantage. This scenario is not hypothetical. It's already in motion. Scenario 2. Supply chain fragility. SHEIN's Thousand-Supplier Web is concentrated almost entirely in one region of southern China. A single disruption, a pandemic lockdown, a geopolitical crisis in the Taiwan Strait, a major earthquake in Guangzhou could paralyze the entire system. We saw during COVID how fragile concentrated supply chains can be. SHEIN has begun diversifying into Turkey, Brazil, and Mexico. But as of 2024, the overwhelming majority of its production, estimated at 80 to 85%, still flows through Guangzhou. That's a vulnerability, and it's one that competitors with diversified global supply chains could exploit if circumstances shift. Scenario 3, and this is the one that should surprise you, cultural backlash. SHEIN's core demographic is Gen Z, ages 16 to 27. But here's the twist. This is also the generation most vocal about sustainability, ethical labor, and environmental impact. SHEIN produces an estimated 6.3 million tons of carbon dioxide annually from its operations and supply chain. Investigations by Channel 4 in the UK and Public Eye in Switzerland have documented suppliers working 18-hour shifts for pennies per garment. As awareness grows, the brand that thrives on social media virality becomes vulnerable to social media backlash. The same algorithm that amplifies SHEIN haul videos can just as easily amplify exposés. The weapon that was supposed to create strength becomes the weakness. Most people think this is a simple story about cheap clothes. But here's what's really happening. SHEIN is a stress test for Western capitalism. It reveals every inefficiency, every outdated regulation, every comfortable assumption that legacy retailers have relied on for decades. It forces an uncomfortable question. Did Western fashion brands lose because SHEIN was unfairly advantaged, or because they were too slow, too wasteful, and too arrogant to innovate? The answer, honestly, is both. And that's what makes this moment so fascinating. We're watching the collision of 2 economic philosophies in real time. One built on brand heritage, seasonal cycles, and controlled scarcity. The other built on data, speed, and radical efficiency. Neither is perfect. Both are evolving. The next 12 to 24 months will determine whether SHEIN becomes the permanent template for global retail or a cautionary tale about building empires on regulatory loopholes and unsustainable labor practices. Either way, the demand-first manufacturing model is here, and every industry should be paying attention. If this breakdown helped you understand something the mainstream coverage keeps missing, subscribe and turn on notifications. I go deep on these systems every week. And drop a comment. I want to know, do you think SHEIN survives the regulatory crackdown, or does the model collapse without the de minimis advantage? Let's discuss.